Good evening and welcome everyone to part 2 of A Relevant Conversation, and we are discussing the subject of racism, we're discussing Black Lives Matter, and we are trying to move on the conversation from last week. If you haven't seen that, you can watch that back, so take a look at that if you can. If you watch this now, take a look at that as well. It will really help with the context of everything. Tonight we've got a different panel, and it's great to have Rachel and Alex, who are from the same household. So yes, they are less than 2 metres away from one another, or even less than 1 metre. So don't worry about that too much. So there's Rachel and Alex, there's Catherine, and there's Bayanda, and there's Deli, and there's Moa. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to ask them if they just introduce themselves and just say a little bit about themselves, and we'll start with Rachel.
Okay, so my name is Rachel. I'm a doctor at the moment. I work at Oldham Hospital, and at church I actually lead worship at the Lighthouse, which is really amazing. I am half Mexican and half Chinese, and I was raised in Canada, and then we moved over here when I was 12 years old.
Brilliant, thanks Rachel.
I'm a bit less complex than that. My name's Alex, I'm one of the pastors here at the Lighthouse. I guess when I fill those forms in to say what ethnicity you are, I always, think well, white British, but not really. You've got Italian ancestry, there's all sorts of bits and bobs in there, I guess, like most people. So that's me.
And I'm Catherine, originally from Zambia, which is in Africa. I've been in the United Kingdom for about 23 and a half years. Like Rachel, I'm a doctor, I'm a psychiatrist, and I work in Manchester.
Brilliant, thank you Catherine. On to Bayanda.
I'm Bayanda Moyo, and I was born in Zimbabwe as well, and I was raised there until I was around 8. I came over here in 2007 and I've been living here since with my family.
Yeah, and you're a youth pastor.
I'm here on team at the Lighthouse as well.
Probably 2 mothers there.
Hello, my name is Dele Bande. I was born in the UK and in Hull actually a while ago, but I didn't actually grow up in the UK. So when I was like just about 1, my parents moved back to Nigeria, and I lived in Nigeria till I was 19. So my formative years were spent growing up in Nigeria. I moved back here when I was 19 to go to university about 30 years ago, and I've been living in Manchester ever since. I'm part owner of a ERP consulting business, so I sort of work with computers.
Brilliant. Thank you all. I'm Paul Hallam, lead pastor here at the Lighthouse. My father was Indian, and my mother was white British. So a little bit of a mix going on there as well. So I want us to just start to look at the whole subject of racism and try to get some kind of personal experience to get the conversation started. Just off record earlier on, we had an amazing conversation. I just want to kind of reflect on that and pick that up again if we can. Rachel, you mentioned some stuff before that I thought would be really, really good for you to share from that as a doctor. And
Yeah. I think coming from such a mixed ethnic background, I don't really slot into one exact culture. I don't fit in with any specific race. So I've actually experienced personally racism from a wide range of races, from black, white, even my own race of being half Chinese. So I've experienced racism across the board. And to another level, I think, as a doctor in the professional setting, I think we were saying earlier, sometimes I think kind of the more professional you become, racism can sometimes affect you in a different kind of level.
yeah, that's really interesting, because Catherine, you mentioned some of that as well. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, so it's been at different levels, and there have been times maybe I would be the only doctor, and the Caucasian patient would just refuse to be seen by a black doctor. Wow. And sometimes maybe it's the perception, maybe it's also just a lack of understanding, and because of the work that I do, sometimes it's because they are ill. So I learned quite quickly to adapt and what to say. But sometimes if people are not unwell and they're really being aggressive and swearing, I've learned to terminate the conversation And if they get to a point where things are really tough, if I have to press charges, I've never needed to, but sometimes just to make a point.
That's a whole lot of baggage to deal with, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Rachel, you mentioned that situation where people talking to you, expecting you wouldn't even speak English.
Yeah, no, I had a patient once who was, I was halfway through a conversation and she just stopped me and was like, "What language do you speak?" And I was just in shock. So I was like, "What do you mean? I've been speaking to you in English this whole..." And I was like, "Well, I'm speaking to you in English." And she was like, "No. I mean, what language do you speak?" And I was with my white colleague actually, who was sat with me at the time, and she just went bright red. And at the time, I didn't really, I don't know, maybe because I've experienced that before, I didn't really get so offended. But yeah, it was a bit of an awkward situation.
So we're seeing that in the workplace. It's pretty common. Deli, can we just come to you a second, and do you want to elaborate on that?
So to be fair, I mean, I have to say I haven't actually really experienced a lot of overt racism, and I know maybe a lot of people don't experience overt racism. People talk about microaggressions, and even those, and I think because I have kind of an attitude in terms of how and you might take sometimes you ignore things. I don't actually. I remember the one time I've been overtly racially abused was when I was out on an outreach and the guy was drunk. So when you're out on an outreach in terms of trying to preach the gospel, you speak to all kinds of people.
Yeah.
And it was drunk, and that was the clear time. It did happen. In terms of my business environment, there are not a lot of black people in the area of the business world I inhabit. So I usually go for a conference in the States once a year. There's about 3,000 people and probably like about 10 black people you can say. So I usually turn that round because they always remember me. That's great. So like handing my cards over. We have very distinctive business cards. Yeah. So the person next year, they know who I am. Brilliant. So I'm not, obviously it doesn't work that way for everyone, obviously. I'm confident in what I do, in terms of what I do, my beliefs and my job. And I did mention before in terms of, it's very important because when I speak to my young boys growing up, I think a part of that is educating them and dealing with them on how to actually navigate the world they're going to grow up in.
And Lisa, your wife.
Yes, she's white. Sorry, I should have been very clear. But my wife is white, and so obviously my
Yorkshire,
Yorkshire girl. Although she wasn't born in Yorkshire, I was born in Yorkshire, but she was born in London. She grew up in Yorkshire, so I have that over. And so my son's a mixed race, and one point I always try to point out to them, it's important to know your identity. What is the most, we all have different layers of identity, and to me, number one is sort of the fact I'm a child of God. Yes, it's important. And part of my identity is that I'm black, that I've got Nigerian heritage. Those I don't discount those and don't put them aside. Very, very. Those are all different important parts of my identity. But the primary one is I'm a child of God, and that should govern everything in terms of life.
Love that. That's really good. You get that? That's really good. Thanks, Deli. That's what a contribution that is. I will use pastor. Now we're going into the really young generation. But Bayanda, I mean, obviously you're a young man, but you do carry quite a lot of influence amongst young people, and I noticed that within the church, certainly on the fringes of the church too. How are you processing all of this?
I would say at the moment I've just really been researching, just been listening to what's been happening. I mean, a lot of kind of the riots and kind of the protesting that has been happening, a lot of it is very deep rooted and goes a lot further back, even beyond my own understanding. So it's taken me a bit of time to kind of research on that, kind of understand.
A bit of a catch-up.
Yeah, a little bit of a catch-up, But when it comes to racism, I have experienced racism.
You have?
Yeah, I have experienced racism a lot when I was younger, when I just came over from
Zimbabwe.
In school, primary school. I came over, I didn't speak English very well. I spoke English, but not very well. I had an African accent from Zimbabwe as well. And a couple of the kids would take a mick out of my accent, or sometimes, and I came to like a really white area as well.
Right.
So, so I was kind of like the only black one in my primary school until there was another kid that joined us at primary school as well. And then when I went to high school, there wasn't that much in high school, but I would experience it maybe on the bus. There was one instance when I got on the bus. I must have been in year 7 or year 8. I would have been 11 or 12 at the time. And I had some friends who were in the older year groups, year 10, year 11. And then we got onto the bus, and this was back when to go anywhere was 85p. And I didn't have to travel a long way. And the bus driver charged me like £4.50. So, and I was like, obviously I didn't really understand. Like, I'm used to paying 85. I didn't even have like £4.50 on me. And then my friend, who was older, he would have been about 15, right in front of me, he was like, I just paid 85p to go further. And the one who was behind me said, I paid the same amount to go further as well. The bus driver kind of just like, no, he has to pay £4.50. And then after kind of trying to speak to him about that, we kind of realized, okay, we'll see what's going on here. And I'm the only black one on the bus, and that's what was happening. So one of my friends was able to be like, look, we see what you're doing. You're being racist. He turns around, he looks at the whole bus, and he goes, hey, everybody, this bus driver is being racist. If you are standing for this, you can either sit on this bus or you can come out and walk with us. Everybody got off the bus at that time. So there was a lot of great support. Everybody got off the bus. The bus driver was kind of just sat there, and then he just drove off when everybody got off the bus.
Wow.
But yeah, I experienced quite a bit when I was younger. Not a lot now.
Right.
But yeah.
Amazing. Oh, could say an awful lot about that, but let's not get. I don't want to get sidetracked a bit. Alex, come to you and as a white person born in the UK, how do you feel about this then?
I think that what we are seeing with the Black Lives Matter, with George Floyd, absolutely appalling. But what we are seeing with that is a very visible and very real tip of an iceberg.
Yeah, it's good.
And I think underneath that, under the surface, there's a whole load of things to do with our attitudes, our subconscious attitudes, the things that we've inherited that we maybe even don't know.
Yeah, it's good.
Might be actually essentially a white supremacist attitude.
Yeah.
But it comes up. We know that our brains are programmed to make snap value judgments based on the immediate things that we see that are visible and obvious. You see somebody, you judge them on their weight, their physical attractiveness, their skin colour, their accent, and we do that, and we bypass a whole load of logical
That's very challenging, but it's true.
in order to make those sometimes very silly and very illogical snap judgments. But it could be that we are actually driven in our behaviour and our actions from that mentality. So I think it's incumbent on all of us. Of course, we would never say that we are racist or whatever, but look deep down and let's call it out, because Jesus was always saying, you can be very good at sorting out other people's problems, but you might not realise you've got an even bigger problem yourself. And let's call it a plank.
Wow.
And Jesus was always calling out prejudice, particularly with the religious leaders.
There was overtones in that, of course, wasn't there? When in John chapter 4, when he meets the woman at the well, a Samaritan woman, a woman of ill repute. The list is endless. Jesus did confront these kind of mindsets that we talked about. A mindset is a set mind. So how and we have to bear in mind that there's two chief primary environments that we as Christians live in.
Yes.
Jesse spoke about it last week when he spoke about the bubbles. So we're in the Lighthouse, we're in the church, we all go to Lighthouse Church, we're all part of that family. I've always felt there's a great family feel in the church. I in all my years as pastor, I've never felt it was an issue. I wouldn't want there to be an issue. Wow, that would be so upsetting. And this has upset me a little bit to think that any of us, like Alex has said, there could be things we have to do a lot of soul searching. Absolutely, every one of us do a lot of soul searching, and be prepared to do that. Hold our hands up and say, have I ever had those negative feelings and everything? And I certainly, people would know that. Pastor Delly was here last week. He's just a soulmate of mine, Pastor Delly. Always really has been since he came on the scene. how do we start to tackle this in both environments?
Yeah.
In the church, it's one thing. I kind of think it's almost easier to deal with it in the church. But then when you go outside of the church, that's a big wide world out there needs changing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anybody want to speak into
So
that?
I think you're quite right to identify two very different scenarios, because the way that we approach the world, yes, we can protest with those who are protesting, yes, we can stand for what is right, but I don't personally feel that we're going to see racism eradicated from the world.
Yeah.
Because the world is the world. Nation shall fight against nation, ethnos shall fight against ethnos, and we'll get ethnic cleansing, which is just another form of racism.
Wow. Wow.
Which is not black versus white, but it could be black versus black, or it could be Bosnian versus Serb, or it could be Irish versus French.
History teaches us, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
You know, and it keeps repeating itself, unfortunately.
And that's always going to manifest itself, no matter how we legislate against it, because it goes down to the heart. But in the church, it is so different, because we are called, as you said about identity, our identity primarily is in Christ. It's not in our nationality, it's not in our ethnicity, it's not in our background, it's not in any of it. We've got to rid ourselves of all that, because Paul says, Galatians 3:28, in Christ Jesus, there is no Jew or Gentile, there is no slave or free, there is no black or white, there is no male or female, but you are all one in Christ Jesus. That's the primary identity that we need to take on. And we may need to shed some other stuff, some stuff that I would even say is like a stronghold, a mindset, a mentality that has been inbred and ingrained, we've inherited without even knowing that we've inherited it.
I totally agree with that, Alex. It does pose questions to me, though. Are there different kinds of racism, degrees of racism that are maybe, I've heard about this, I've heard some of our black leaders talk about this, that are almost like subconscious racism. Because I'll be honest with you, in the church, and I'm generalising here, in the church, and yes, even in the charismatic Pentecostal church and mainstream church denominations that are multinational, I have personally come up against resistance when I have tried to shall I say, get some of our black leaders, our black pastors, onto the platforms to speak. And I've never been resisted verbally for that. I've been resisted by, no, we can't do it. And at times it's absolutely, I'll be honest with you, crushed my spirit. Because in a city like Manchester, I think we should have been giving more voice to our up and coming black leaders, because I think that you know, so for me, I would promote, and I have tried to very much so in our denomination, Jesse and Bayanda and people like that, who I think are coming from backgrounds and ethnicities that are so relevant to speak to our young generations and finding resistance. So can you talk to our listeners about this thing? I see one of the biggest problems, Kevin, is this almost like subconscious racism that's going on, because I think it is there, and it's hard to name it, because who's responsible for that? And I'm thinking of my own denomination as well. And I'm thinking of other denominations where I think at the very, very highest levels there is an absolute, what can you call it really, a dearth of our black leaders. We've got fantastic black pastors, black leaders in our movement. I don't really see them being given a platform. Now that's challenging, and I'll get some flack for that, maybe. But you said before, I think we've got to call it out.
And I think from the professional viewpoint, so when you're doing your postgraduate training and you have to do sets of exams, and there's a mixture of doctors who are doing the same exams, and you see for the written exams almost everyone is passing them. But when it comes to the oral exam, it becomes very clear that perhaps maybe the darker skinned people are not always passing, they're not always progressing, and then they sort of stay on one particular grade of doctors. And I remember becoming very aware of that quite early on, and I thought to myself, I went back to the identity issue. I'm not going to be identified by my skin color, and if I feel that somebody else is identifying me as that, I'm going to call it out. And I think maybe that just my attitude changed. I wasn't going to settle for what other people of my color were saying. Well, you can never pass this exam. You can never become a consultant. You can never. So that change of mindset for me made me approach things differently. So maybe that helped me. But then at the same time, the people who are marking those oral exams, when you walk in, they probably think you may not understand or the way that you present the case, or it sort of sets you back. But actually, you're really, really good at your work. So you find that, from my experience, I noticed that people of dark skin color were taking multiple attempts before passing the exam.
Wow. It's got to say something, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's got to say that it's not a level playing field.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
But I have to say also, like I said before, out there, even people who are not Christians, they are good people.
Yeah.
I've had the real privilege of working with senior colleagues who have trained me, and I've never at any point felt that they looked at my skill or the color of my skin. I've been really privileged. Other people haven't had that.
That's great. It's really good to hear, isn't it? Because we can hear all the negatives sometimes, can't we? And there are some great positives out there. Thank you for sharing that. That's really good. Coming back to you guys, Bayanda, youth pastor, up and coming, emerging leader. I'm always trying to encourage you because we know that he's got a lot about him. He's a really, really talented young man with a great future and a great call on his life as well. I believe that, and I've believed that for a long time now. What can we do to encourage our young leaders to not see this as a wall and a glass ceiling? What can we do?
Danny, I think it's definitely apply. It definitely has to apply within the church, if nowhere else. But I think it applies primarily for anybody who is a Christian. So that identity thing, I know I keep banging on about it, is because when you're so sure of that, then you realize that your future and where you're going in life is not dependent on any gatekeepers, wherever they may be. It's purely dependent on God. It doesn't mean that there might not be bumps in the road. We live in the real world, But ultimately, and this is why, yes, it is a difficult world. Even we as Christians, there are going to be non-Christians out there, and they're saying, well, who do I look to? I don't share your faith. And we need to be there fighting for social justice for everyone. I'm not saying we only fight for Christians.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jesus would have called it out. He would have fought for social justice. But ultimately, as a Christian, you always, I feel, can have that reassurance that, look, I'm a child of God, and God is going to... It actually sounds quite naive, me saying this, but it's just like with everything. We have problems in every area of our life. We have challenges we come through, and this is one of those as a Christian. This should not be something that stops you from getting to where you need to, as long as, because God will see you through it. I know it sounds bad, but
let's do that. And I also think as well, you've got some great examples in the Bible. I always go back to this, and Joseph, who's sold into slavery, becomes a slave, becomes a servant, is in a completely strange land. And yet, look what happens. He becomes the prime minister. So I always like to say to people, particularly young people, I look at my background and where I came from, and I think that what you said there, Deli, is really, really important. God can get you through all of that, get you through all of your background and all of the reasons why you shouldn't or you couldn't. And make sure that God's will be done in your life, no matter what. Whether it comes to prison, the pit, if God wants you in the palace, they'll put you in the palace. I think that's really, really important to keep that.
And I think just to add to that, because I think it is really important, because I just don't want to be seen to be ignoring what obvious realities are. I think the reason why it's so important for the young people, especially young black men, and young black men do face it as well because they face racism and sexism as well. Although young black men, there's particular issues with law enforcement and they're being attracted to that and the unwanted attentions that young black men face. Is the reason why I feel it's so important is so that we build people that because of how they are inside, they're not crushed.
Yeah,
So I think part of
very
the problem is, people say, oh, you're being naive, you're not facing reality. The problem is not. I'm trying to build strong individuals here,
Yeah.
growing strong plants, so that when they grow up,
Very good.
they're not crushed.
Yeah, very good.
And that's why. And that's really the only thing I can give to them. In
Yeah.
fact, your identity.
And that's the same with
That's
your children.
That's my children. Yeah.
Your children. I mean,
That's
they're
why I
just
tell them
fantastic examples of that, to be honest, Ellie.
Yeah.
They are, aren't they? And we just the kids are so individualistic, but they've got so much. Same with yourself, Catherine, and that is the case too. And I mean, the Moyo family, what can we say? They're just fantastic, aren't they? So I mean, you guys are just amazing. So we've still got about 8-9 minutes left. So how do we take this on from here to be practicable and what do we need to do?
I think touching on the whole thing of the glass ceiling is really important because you were talking earlier on before we started filming about what we teach our children as parents, and sometimes that can be very negative. The effects of, well, we're not that kind of people, we don't do that. And you actually set the glass ceiling for them and they'll never break through it. But for those who recognise that there is a glass ceiling, you can't say there isn't one. That's not the way to solve it. You say, there is one, because you're just going to bang your head on it. But you can say, no, but we can smash it. It's not going to be, like you're saying about the gatekeepers. They may be there at the gates, but, there's ways past.
Yes,
And I think it's encouraging that mentality. It's nurturing that kind of, because it's all in the mind again, isn't it? It's all in the mindset, it's all in the attitude. That's where it starts, that's where it has to be dealt with, that's the root. We talk about systemic, you hear that word a lot, systemic, to do with the root system. And it's there that we start to change attitudes, and that again is where the difference between reformation and transformation.
I was pleased that a couple of years ago we had a mission. We take a missions team out to a certain Eastern European country, which we'll name, it's Romania, and we always take some of our young people, and there's always some of our young black people who go, and I have to actually brief them before they go for some of the treatment that they'll get for no other reason, just the colour. And I was so pleased. About 3 years ago, I took a team and we took one of our Eritrean kids, Luam, and she had such a great time. I actually reckon that she's the first ever Eritrean to go on mission to Romania. How about that, guys? Isn't that fantastic? And Rachel, you know, because you've been to youth camps, dynamic youth camps and stuff like that. And I've always tried to teach young people, and I'm not saying I don't see colour, I see it and celebrate it, quite honestly. I love as many different nationalities as possible. I think you know that about me. And I've always taught this, and I'll repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. I want my ceiling to be their floor. For me, that epitomises what we should be like as leaders, so that we give them a starting place that's already quite good, and then the sky's the limit.
That's right.
So glass ceilings, we can help them smash through that. But some of those glass ceilings are in the mind, aren't they? It doesn't mean to say they're not real, because they're in the mind. They are very real. But those mindsets we need to overcome. Somebody just recently spoke to me. I was really pleased they did do, and this one was Paul. Really glad you're doing these conversations. I spoke to somebody, and I wanted to just, I suppose, he just wanted to speak to somebody and get some support. And that person turned around to him and said, "Oh, there's no racism happening here." And immediately, you've just closed someone down, haven't you? And you know, so what should our attitude be? Rachel, Alex, well, I want to bring you into that, and then I want. What should our attitude be coming from a non-black background to that situation?
Yeah, okay. Well, I just think, I was talking actually with my dad earlier, and I was like, when I think, because there's been so much happening with George Floyd, and whatever you say on television or on Instagram, people are going to criticize whatever you say.
Absolutely.
So I was like, how, as a Christian, not just as a non-black person or someone of mixed race, as a Christian, how am I supposed to respond to this? And we were talking about it earlier, and I was like, well, what would Jesus do? And the truth is, if you look at the Bible, Jesus was someone who fought for justice. And we were saying that he even befriended the people that no one wanted to be befriended, whether it was the color of their skin or they were poor or whatever, if they were lepers, full of sickness. Jesus' response was to stick up and to side with those who people didn't. And I think as a Christian, you know, we can actively protest, we can join organizations, we can hashtag Black Lives Matters and post a black photo on Tuesdays. And I think Jesus would have supported that movement. However, I think if we don't respond differently than the world, then we're not responding how Christ would have responded. And I think ultimately, Jesus came to seek and save the lost. And the reason why he sided with the oppressed is to point them to Jesus.
Absolutely.
And I think
love that.
That's our response as a church.
What matters most. It is. I love that. And you see, Jesus, one of the things that Jesus always brought things back to was heart issues, didn't he? The heart counts. Out of the abundance of the heart mouth speaks. So there's a big concern because racism does come from the heart. And the heart is deceitfully, desperately wicked above all things. Who could know it? I, the Lord, know the heart. So where do we take this, Catherine? How do we go from here and this conversation? How do we speak into the audience now, much wider audience? What do we do? And what would your appeal be to the listeners?
I think first and foremost is acknowledge that people are hurting. Sometimes we can minimize or not understand what they're going through, and then, like in that case, you refer to close them down. But acknowledge that they're hurting, acknowledge that hurt, and how can I help? I like the acronym to think before you speak.
Very good.
Is it true what you're going to say? Is it helpful? Will it inspire them? And is it kind? You know, and is it necessary? So if we think before we speak, I think it's going to help a lot of people. And as a black woman with a black son, you know, because it's very anxiety provoking out there. Will my son be attacked? I have to have hope. I have to have hope. And just like Saul was, before he became Paul, he was persecuting the church. He was what we would describe as a racist and, you know, attacking people. But he was transformed, totally transformed. The heart was completely changed. And this is the one who wrote the letter to the Galatians talking about no Jew, male, female, and all that. So I still have hope that we, as a body of Christ, as people who believe in God, we can still pray and ask God for transformation.
Amen. Not reformation, transformation. Absolutely. Very quickly, Deli, what's your advice? Some all.
Yeah, in some it's really important, like Catherine and Rachel have said, it's really important that really is the way we've got to go in terms of recognizing there's just issues of social justice, calling it out, but recognizing ultimately really that racism is sin. And the only solution for sin is Jesus Christ. So it's a multi-track approach, really, isn't it? Recognizing that on a personal, individual level, recognizing societal imbalances and the fact that we need to address the social justice issues.
Great. Ayanda?
I did a devotion on this earlier on during the week, if you've seen it. And my advice to you is to get woke. Get woke, and what I mean by that is trying to get a deeper understanding, like shifting your perspective, trying to understand more what's going on. finding out more information about what's going on.
So
why
if I awoke this morning, am I woke?
not quite. No, to be awakened, to find out more information about what's happening, opening your heart and your mind to
Love
learn about what's happening, and then you can take a step forward to then kind of share.
That's really helpful. Rach, do you want to just speak to our listeners and just give a last
Yeah.
minute piece of advice?
When you were saying that, it made me think. I was watching this professor of law and politics in America, and she was saying, she wasn't a Christian, and she was saying, we're not getting to the source of racism because we're diagnosing the wrong problem and therefore we're treating it wrong.
Yeah.
But she was talking about how we have to do more activism and
Yeah.
protest. So when I thought about that, I was like,
Yeah.
actually as Christians,
Yeah.
sometimes we're not diagnosing the right problem,
Yeah.
therefore we're not helping with the issue. And I think, like we've said, we need to diagnose that what the world really needs is a strong God and a strong Jesus. And if we can recognize that racism does exist, and it's always going to exist as long as sin is in the world, but if we can love each other and love the church the way Christ does, then ultimately we can diagnose that problem, point people to Jesus, who is ultimately the solution or the treatment. So,
Lovely. I think we might do another conversation. We've run out of time, but thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate that. We might take this on even further in a week's time, so keep your eyes open for that. Thank you to our panel today, to Rachel, to Alex, to Catherine, to Bayanda and to Delhi. Really appreciate them taking time to come and discuss this. Please, everyone out there, especially if I'm speaking to the Christians who are viewing and looking on, let's all do some soul searching on this, because things won't change until we be the change. God bless. See you soon.